our brain is programmed to think about the bad things. That's like from a survival point of view. We have to be thinking that there's a saber-toothed tiger around the corner. Luckily, there isn't, but our brain hasn't adapted. So it is skewed to think about the bad more than it is the positive. And it really has to be a conscious effort to start to think about, okay, what are the good things that I do have? What is working well? And then the next step of that is understanding why they're good, why it's working well. Because if you understand the why, that's the bit that you can start to recreate.
Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast, The Bold Tackle. We are your hosts, Sophie Howard and Oliver Howard, and we are ready to tackle bold topics in sport,
highlight the women's football industry,
and speak about the unspoken.
If you are ready to get an insight into what really goes on behind the scenes, join us on our journey and listen in
to The Bold Tackle. Hi and welcome back to a new episode of our podcast, The Bold Tackle. Hi Soph, lovely to have you back in the call.
Hi Ollie, nice to see you again.
And the three of us again. You've got the job to introduce, so who do we have here today?
I always have this honour. We've got a very special guest today. We've got the performance psychologist for Team GB for the Olympics, and way more than that, obviously. But we've got Jess Thom on. Hi Jess, how are you doing?
Hi, really well, thank you. Lovely to be here chatting to you both.
Thanks so much for joining us. A little bit nervous because I spoke about you so much with Sarah, our performance psychologist, and she spoke so highly of you. So I'm really, really excited for this chat.
Well, that's good. She's awesome as well, so you're lucky to have her.
Oh, I'll pass it on. To be fair, she'll probably listen in. She said she'll listen to this one in particular.
Oh God, that puts the pressure on.
Sophie said you've got a busy job coming up. For all the people who don't know you yet, who are you and what is so busy that's coming up?
Yeah, so I have a couple of different jobs, but my main focus at the moment is for lead psychologist for Team GB. So obviously with Paris, I think it's 86 days as a countdown. Yes, it was 87, something like that. It's really quite chaotic. And on top of that, I am embedded in one of the Olympic sports day to day. I work quite heavily with them with the Olympic shooting team. And they have got their final Olympic qualification competitions on the horizon. So just preparing them for that and heading out to Croatia on Sunday with them to hopefully secure some more Olympic spots. So yeah, busy.
How many psychologists are there in the Team GB team? Is it just you or is there quite a few?
So there's the Team GB headquarter team, and that is you work with the British Olympic Association. And so there's myself as the lead for that, and then my colleague who is another HQ psychologist. But then the sports will have their own psychologists. So there will be, I actually don't know the number, 15 plus more, probably in 20s, who will be embedded with the actual individual sports teams and national governing bodies. And some of those will travel to Paris and some of them won't travel to Paris. They'll work remotely. Just depends on the sport.
Okay, I think we'll talk about the Olympics and your job and how to prepare the athletes as well. But I would like to, at the beginning, maybe focus on a very current topic because there's a lot of news currently out there about athletes opening up, about speaking to psychologists, which you as a reader are not really used to hearing so much about it. Is this something new? Do you have much more on your hands than you did in the past? Or is it just more open now?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. Like when I think back to when I started my career, there were very few posts and jobs available for sports psychologists, whereas now every week there seems to be a new post. So I think the profession is growing and the demand for it is growing. And I think that there's been a real push to normalize the fact that you're speaking to a psychologist. And you know, people often think, or they used to think, that you're speaking to a psychologist because you have a problem. And that's just not the case, especially within the world of sports psychology. Actually, we don't deal as much with the problems, we deal with the performance enhancement bit. So helping you perform better. So, trying to change that narrative and help people understand that you're not with us because you're broken or you need help. You're coming to see us because we can help you be better on the pitch, on that Olympic start line.
But a lot of the times you read about it, and you have probably way more insight, and obviously we'll stay on the surface, not talk about individuals, but it seems like a lot of these athletes have mental problems or mental struggles. Is that increasing because of the more commercial types of sports, the more money that is involved? Because it's a lot of times it's footballers or athletes in big sports. Is it getting worse? Is the pressure on these athletes getting worse?
Um, maybe the pressure is getting worse. I think the pressure has always been quite high on elite athletes and professional athletes, and I think that the research shows that athletes don't really have worse mental health problems than the general public, apart from eating disorders, which I think is the only one where athletes tend to be higher in. But compared to, with all the rest of the mental health disorders and problems, it's about the same. So, there isn't necessarily that increased risk of suffering from poor mental health just because you're an athlete. But I do think that there are, unique stressors to athletes that can make it quite challenging, and that pressure to perform constantly week on week is quite a lot to deal with. And some people do need some support in being able to cope with that. But as a whole, I don't think that athletes are worse off from a mental health perspective.
Do you think there's an overlapping, a crossover between, let's say, mental health, I like to call it mental well-being, and performance psych, the mental side of the sport? Do you think there's a crossover and they rely on one another?
Yeah, absolutely. There absolutely is. And, you probably know yourself, Sophie, if you're feeling good in yourself, it's easier to go and play well. And when you're not feeling good and you're struggling, that mental capacity is significantly reduced, and that will have an impact on how you're performing. So there absolutely is a crossover. And I think that's why sport has suddenly started to invest in this more, because they recognize that if we can help athletes be in a good place, they'll do better. And there's a lot that we can do to support them to be in a better place. And I just think that it's an absolute no-brainer to recognize and support that as much as possible, because sports invest so much in the physical side. And if they even took a tenth of that budget and invested that in the mental side of the game, honestly, I don't know. It's not 1% gain. It's tens of percent of gains that I think you would get from doing that. So yeah, it's really important.
Can we talk about the first approach you have with athletes? Because I can't imagine it being normal for someone to just open up to a person they maybe haven't ever met before. How do you get to break that wall, emotional wall? And how do you start increasing the mental health and getting them to perform better?
When I first go into a sports environment, to be honest, I'm not talking sports psychology. I'm just being Jess, and just trying to get to know people and understand them as individuals, and understand the culture within that environment, and really spend a lot of time just building relationships. Because when you have that relationship, when you have that rapport, when you have that trust, then athletes feel way more comfortable talking about some of the potentially more difficult things. And yeah, if you don't have that, if you don't spend time building the relationships, you're not going to get anywhere as a sports psychologist. But also, like, I wouldn't necessarily focus on the problems with an individual. I work from a sort of strengths-based approach. So looking at what is already working really well and trying to make it even better. And that feels a lot safer for people, I think, because it's not sort of about exposing weaknesses. It's about looking at what they're brilliant at and making it even more brilliant. So, starting on that foot with an athlete then opens the door to have deeper conversations around what might be troubling them, but that doesn't come straight away.
It's interesting you say that it makes sense to focus on the positives, because I heard on a different podcast that the number one issue of leading to a depression is constantly thinking about the negative stuff, constantly thinking about your problems, and just doing errands or getting out or doing sport or doing exercise helps your mental health. And it's interesting that this is exactly what you're saying, Maurice. Focus on the positives. We'll talk about the negative parts or your problems as well, but focus on the positives. And that's the first step of getting where you want to be.
Yeah, completely. I think that our brain is programmed to think about the bad things. That's like from a survival point of view. We have to be thinking that there's a saber-toothed tiger around the corner. Luckily there isn't, but our brain hasn't adapted. So it is skewed to think about the bad more than it is the positive. And it really has to be a conscious effort to start to think about, okay, what are the good things that I do have? What is working well? And then the next step of that is understanding why they're good, why it's working well. Because if you understand the why, that's the bit that you can start to recreate. But I also think it's important not to just completely wash over all of the unhelpful and potentially negative thoughts that you might have, because they're really valid as well. And, they're normal to have at the same time. So, trying to spend energy suppressing them is wasted energy. And if you can go with that, okay, I accept that I'm feeling this way and I'm thinking this way, and I can think about what has been really good today and what is working well. So you can have both of those at the same time. And I speak to clients about not wasting the time and energy trying to suppress how they're feeling and how they're thinking, because it's just exhausting and it's not sustainable.
Just how do you, well, you mentioned about the first approach, but how do you break that ice in a sense? Because I grew up in a team environment and it might be different in individual sports, but I know in my building that not everyone would seek that support for the sports psychology support or the mental side of the game. And often when as teammates we have discussions, they're like, yeah, but what would that do to me? Like, how can they help me? What would you say? How can you help all of us as athletes? I've had, don't want to say I've had a lot of experience, but I've had a lot of exposure, I guess, to performance psychology. So therefore I know what helps me, and therefore I know how crucial it is to my game. But especially for younger girls and boys coming up, why do you think they should seek that support or work with someone in sports psychology?
Well, that's a really good question. And I have also been in many environments where more than 50% of the team won't speak to the psychologist. So it's not uncommon. And, I guess I come at it from that place of you don't have to if you don't want to. So I'm not forcing anyone to do this, because I do not have a magic wand and I cannot just wave it and make it happen. The other person, the athlete has to put a lot of the work in to feel the benefits. But I guess I come at it from a place of like everything that you do starts with your brain, and therefore, would it not be helpful to understand your own brain and understand how you can use it even more effectively? And I focus in on that strengths-based stuff. So I sort of reiterate that I'm not here to pick apart what you can't do. I'm here to help you identify what you can and make that even better. Um, what I found is in the past is that a couple of players will come start working with me, and like the change is quite noticeable. They improve, they get better, and that starts spreading throughout the team. And other people go, "Oh yeah, what a bit of what she's got. Like, how do I do that?" And then they go, "Well, actually, I'm just working on my psych game." And then they start to go, "Okay, well, maybe I should start to do that." And then it's sort of light touch, really, until that relationship is built. And And I'm certainly not in that place of being there to tell people what they should do or how they should do it. That's just not what it's about. So, um, yeah, that would be my advice is like, you don't know what you don't know. So give it a go. And I might say, what are you worried about? And explore that fear. And is it really a reality, or is it just a thought that you have? And why not try it?
Is there also advice you could give to younger athletes that maybe don't have this setup and don't have the possibility to talk to someone like you? Should they talk to someone else, to family members, friends, or whatever?
Yeah, completely. Speak to your coaches, speak to your friends, speak to your family. There's also loads of resources out there. There's podcasts like this, which are really helpful. There's books that you can read on sports psychology. There's I'm sure there's websites that have really helpful information. So just get out there and explore and see what's landing and what's resonating for you. And you might listen to a podcast and take one little gem and apply that, and that's enough. That can have an impact. So just start somewhere. I also think that there's loads of really brilliant apps out there, not necessarily from a sports psych point of view, but from just like a mental health and positive mental health. So you've got like Headspace or Calm app, um, and they're not a lot of money, but they can teach you some amazing mental skills that are only going to put you in a good position, whatever sport you're doing. So you don't necessarily need someone like me to start that sports psychology journey.
And just on that, just because I know there'll be a lot of young girls listening to this, questions we often get, Ollie and I get, and I try to answer them as best as I can, just based on my experience, but I'm not the expert. And the questions are often, I lack confidence when I go into games. I'm changing teams. I'm nervous. I've got a big final coming up. My nerves are through the roof. These are the three most common kind of things we get. What would your advice be? I know every situation is different and every individual is different. But overall, generally speaking, what advice would you give to those young girls and boys?
Yeah, so this might be a bit controversial, but I'm for the school of thought that you don't need confidence to perform well. It helps, of course it helps, but it's not a requirement. And confidence is a feeling. Nerves are a feeling, and feelings are like the weather. They change. We don't have that much control over them. The bit that we have more control over is our behaviors. And actually, when you are feeling confident, what are the things that you do? Start naming those, drilling down on what I would be able to physically see you do on that pitch, because that's the bit that you can focus your attention to. That's the bit you can control day in, day out. And getting clarity on when I am confident, this is what I do, helps you manage the times when you're not confident. And it's super normal to not feel confident all the time. Like, it's just not going to happen. But when I'm not feeling confident, what will help me is knowing what I want to do in that situation. And it's similar with nerves before games. Everyone gets nervous. Most people. I've met the odd one who says that they don't. I'm not sure I believe them, to be honest. But it's normal. And again, nerves don't mean anything. They don't mean that something bad is coming or that you're not going to play well. It is just a feeling. And actually, what you can start to do is just be a little bit curious about that feeling. So go, okay, well, yeah, I'm nervous because this is really important to me. And so what do I want to do about that? Well, I want to prepare. I want to think about what things I want to do on the pitch today. I want to think about what questions I want to ask my coach, my teammates. And so, being curious about that feeling, accepting that it is just a feeling, and using it in a way that's going to help you and propel you to do something in terms of a positive action is the way to do it. And, nerves, I often say to people, like, they just mean you're ready to perform. Like, the body responds in the same way when you're excited as when it does when you're nervous. We just decide to label it nerves versus excitement. So yeah, you can start to think about, when you're curious about that feeling, you can start to think, well, does it have to be because I'm anxious, or can it be because I'm actually really excited about this? And just that sort of shift gives a whole different outlook. It like the weight lifts. So yeah, nerves, normal, confidence fluctuates, but neither are particularly important when it comes to performing well. What is important is preparing and thinking about what behaviors you want to do, and thinking about what it is that you've done in the past to give yourself the best chance of doing those behaviors on the pitch. I don't know if that resonates with you, Sophie. Like,
Yeah, I've spoke to Sarah a lot and other psychologists at Scotland, and we've got this term about confidence actions. So we allow, even if I'm not feeling confident on the pitch, what are my confidence actions? Which is what you obviously just spoke about. So am I right in summarising that we go away from the feelings, we allow the feelings because they're part of us, but we then focus on my behaviours and my actions, what I can actually influence? Is that a good summary for?
spot on. Yeah, yeah. Notice your feelings and then decide what you want to do in response to them. They don't have to dictate your actions.
I could have done with this chat a long time ago when I was on the football pitch, because just a couple of episodes ago, I spoke to Soph and said that a lot of the time my problem was when I was feeling confident, I didn't worry too much about what was going to go wrong. And I played much better than I did when I was nervous and worrying, am I going to make this pass? Am I going to do this? And just going from doubting to believing could have made such a big difference. So a little bit late, but hopefully it helps a couple of other people.
Oh, no, I know. Absolutely. I mean, I came across this information far too late as well for anything sport-wise, but it does help me in day-to-day life because it's applicable, not just on the pitch, but when I'm doing stuff like this or presenting or going into a new club environment. I feel those nerves just like, an athlete does stepping onto the pitch in front of thousands of people. So yeah, I try and give myself a dose of my own medicine every now and then.
I would like to really talk about the Olympics in a minute, but this just brought a question to my mind, you saying this. How do you deal with the situation of, obviously you said you try to focus on a lot of the positives with your athletes, but at some point you do talk about maybe the deeper problems or a lot of negativity they need to deal with. How do you deal with that situation of being that negativity pool and taking it away from them? Can you sort of shut off after a session and go back to being positive Jess? Or do you deal with these situations over a longer period and maybe struggle with them as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important thing for psychologists to think about because it is really tiring. And especially at the high pressure events, we are the sponge of all the sort of stress, anxiety, negative emotions, and like poor performances realistically happen more often than the really great performances. So it is really tiring dealing with that. And I have to look after myself through that process. And I've definitely gotten better at that as the years have gone by. And I have a supervisor, so someone who I would talk to and bring my problems to, like my own sort of psychologist. And I have her that I can check in with when I'm just feeling a bit rubbish or like struggling to see through a particular challenge that I'm facing. I've got that person just to run things past. But also, like, what I've learned over time is like I have to prioritize my sleep, which we were talking about earlier. Not always the easiest thing to do. But my own basic self-care, a bit of sleep, eat well, hydrate. I would like to exercise more than I do, but that just recharges my battery so that then when something comes along that drains it, I've got that capacity to do that. And I also have to plan in breaks for myself because I can't sustain this for a really long period of time. So I know after the Olympic Games, I'm taking 3 weeks off and I will need that. And I've got a week off beforehand as well. So regular breaks and using the support is really important. And there's the odd thing that still throws me and I'll take to bed worrying about. But on the whole, I'm quite good at sort of closing it off because I've practiced a lot of it.
I've heard about sleep helping with sorry, Soph, but I've heard about sleep helping your mental health. But does nutrition play such a big part in hydrating as well?
Yeah, I'm definitely no expert in this area, but it is important. Yes, it absolutely is important. Like our body, our brain needs nutrition and hydration. It's pretty simple, that sort of concept. So it really does. Fueling well is really important. I don't know if it's as important as sleep. Sleep's probably the number one thing, but I do think I just feel it in myself when I've eaten better and drunk enough water. I function so much better than when I've eaten McDonald's for 2 days in a row because that's all there is available at 10 o'clock at night when you're finally getting your supper. So yeah.
The question I was going to ask is, do you ever walk through life and you have a normal conversation and these are not your athletes and you're off duty
Yeah.
and you listen to the conversations, you're like, I wish I could help them. Or I wish I could. Like I think I'd find it hard to switch off. If I have
Yeah.
normal conversation and it's quite obvious what's going on,
Yeah.
but you're currently not on duty, do you find that hard or?
Yeah, I do, especially with my husband, actually. He's like, "Stop psychologizing me." I'm like, "I can't help it." Like, it's so obvious what you should do, but he doesn't need to
Yeah.
hear that in that moment.
Yeah.
So,
For him.
yeah, yeah, it does get me in trouble sometimes. It is hard, not to just jump in and give advice, and I really have to remember just to be there and listen, and sometimes that's more powerful than jumping in with a solution, to be honest. But I'm quite like sort of solution focused. I quite like just fixing things. But, the professional me recognizes that it's not my place to do that. And it's not that simple. Otherwise, they probably would have fixed the problem themselves if it was that simple. So, yeah. But the other thing that I find quite amusing is that, if you go to like a social gathering, like go to a wedding, and then you sit next to someone, you tell them you're a psychologist, and they just offload their life stories and all their worries. They're like, "Can you fix this for me?" And I was thinking about maybe saying that I'm a postman or something because I was like, I just want to have fun, I don't want to get into this deep conversation. So I sometimes, I might find myself in that position where I don't really want to be as well. So yeah,
I've
double-edged.
seen that before. I've seen
Yeah,
that before. We had someone at the table who told us she was a psychologist, and people just started bombarding her with questions. She was like, "Hey, I'm off duty. Can we just have a drink?" And that was the end of the conversation on that topic. But well, you don't get to speak to people like that and to get their mindset. And it is such an interesting topic. So I do understand, but I
yeah,
do understand that you want to get away from it as well
true.
because you have it
Yeah,
all day.
yeah.
So let us jump us to the Olympics because I think that could be really interesting as well. What is your job going to be at the Olympics, and how do you prepare the athletes for that big occasion?
Mm. Yeah, so sort of I've got two jobs there really. So I am the lead psychologist within the headquarters team for Team GB. And then I'm embedded as the lead sports psychologist for shooting as a specific sport as well. So in terms of my wider Team GB role, my job, so in the lead up to the games, is building a really robust mental health strategy. So looking at how we support well-being and mental health in the build up to the games and at the games, and also with my medical colleagues, planning for different scenarios that might show up and happen at the games, and thinking about our responses to that, so that we are um, not sort of scrabbling together for resource and best way to respond. Um, whilst I'm at the games, I'm there really to support the staff, so the Team GB staff that put the games on and support the athletes. So it is long, like you see 2 weeks of it, but some of us are away for 5 weeks, so it's a really long slog where you're working long hours, you don't get days off, so it's quite an intense environment, and that can take its toll on people. So my job is just to check in with them, see how they're doing, offer any support, help them gain that perspective, because it's really easy to lose perspective. So helping them to see the wood for the trees, and just de-escalate situations that could be getting a little bit too heated potentially. And then my sport specific role, that's where I'll be much more focused on the athletes and their performance. So shooting is actually not in Paris. It's 3 hours outside of Paris, which makes it really challenging. So I'll be going down for a couple of days stints across the games period. And we prepare athletes, I think, really well. All the sports do it really well, because this is like, we work in a 4-year calendar, and this is the big event that we're building up to. It's different to football, where it's week by week and maybe a big cup once or twice in the year. But we have time, we know it's coming, and we prepare for it. So we're helping athletes to have their own sort of game plan, their own match plan, and think about what that looks like, what the strategies that they are going to use to manage themselves, what their ideal performance looks like. But then taking it wider than that. So, friends and family will be traveling out to Paris. It's sort of as close to home games as we're getting in the near future. So that is wonderful, but it brings quite a lot of noise, and helping athletes plan for, okay, when do you want to see your friends, family? Like, do you want to take a different phone number so that you're not getting texts at 11 p.m. and pressure to see, your boyfriend after your match when you're just feeling a bit pants and you want to be by yourself? So starting to have those conversations is really important. And ultimately, it's the Olympic Games. I want them to try and enjoy it. It's not actually that enjoyable for athletes, but what do they want their Olympic experience to be? Do they want to go to the opening ceremony? Do they want to go to the closing ceremony? Like, how do they want to sort of connect with the wider Olympic and Team GB movement? So we spend hours and hours and hours talking about this stuff, and preparing as a staff group as well, so that we're ready on the same sort of topics that we talk about the athletes with as well.
Are athletes that are professional still very nervous before these occasions?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really funny because like the start of this year kicked in, and it happens every single like game cycle. The start of the Olympic year, people just lose their heads. And you see it, doesn't it? It's like they start doing crazy things that you just never would expect. So one of my colleagues, who is an ex-athlete, she tells a story of athletes going to the Olympic Games and then suddenly changing everything that they do because they see Adam Peaty eating raisins. They're there eating like a kilogram of raisins before they race. They don't even like raisins, So people do strange things, and it's because they feel that pressure, that stress, that anxiety. And my job is to remind them what the plan was and to stick to the plan and don't eat raisins because it's not going to make a difference.
So don't you start with raisins?
No raisins.
Oh, don't you want it?
I love
that
raisins.
won't be on my dietary. Yeah. Do you find it different working with team sport athletes and individual sport athletes? Or would you say if you strip the whole sport, actually the work I do, the psychology work, is pretty much the same?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I think like the brain is the brain. It's the same whether you're, in a team sport or an individual sport. But I think maybe sometimes the focus of the work is a little bit different, because in team sports, you have the team dynamic angle that is really important, and you'll know yourself can influence performance quite heavily. Whereas an individual sport, like you don't really have that as much. So, the focus is slightly different. But in terms of like the one-to-one individual work, it's pretty much the same. The skills are the same in terms of like managing your mind. I would say there's just, and to be honest, it's not necessarily even team versus individual. Even within the different individual sports, there's different psych skills that are required. Like, shooting is very much about attention and being able to, focus for a long period of time. Sailing is about decision making, so it's sort of, there's differences within the individual sports as well. But team would be that team dynamics that you would bring in on top of the other stuff that you do on an individual level.
Which is hard work, I can tell you.
But I think this team and individual sport works both ways, because when we grew up, we played tennis and we played football. And I found that on the tennis pitch, you were on your own, you spoke to yourself much more, but you started doubting way earlier than you do when you're in a team sport. Because with that team dynamics, yes, it can work against you, but it can also work towards you when you have that teammate behind you. Come on, Ollie, you can get it, or whatever. And I find that's what I was missing on the individual side. On the other side, on the individual side, you were doing it for your own, and you could navigate it yourself. So I think it works both ways, and I loved growing up with both.
Yeah, absolutely. I think tennis is probably psychologically the most challenging sport, because you are out there completely on your own for a really long period of time. And it always fascinates me how quickly that momentum can shift between players in tennis. And I just could, like, before you're sort of three love down, and like you're not really sure how you've got there. And I think sometimes, like, you can get into a place where like the bit of your brain that takes over is almost that survival bit that is in that fight, flight, freeze mode, and it's not a fantastic tennis player. So it's not making the right sort of decisions and noticing things, and pulling yourself out of that is quite challenging. But other people can pull you out of that more easily, which is why I have a job, really, and why I travel to competitions. But you're right, your teammates can do that, and we often work on that with team sports, is like help people understand each other and notice when they've been pulled away from how they want to be on the pitch, and then know what you need to say to them to get them back on track. So there's definitely an advantage from a team sport in terms of having that support. But then you have the flip side of it of like, well, then I don't want to let my teammates down, and that can be a bit of a noisy gremlin as well. But I think I would find personally team sports easier to manage from a psych point of view than individual, where especially tennis, even golf, you've got your caddy that you can talk to, and I think it's easier than tennis.
To be honest, I think like growing up for me, when we were playing tennis, when I was playing tennis, I already knew that there was a mental side of the game. Obviously, it was very obvious. Whereas growing up when I was playing football, I didn't even think that there was a mental side to the game because of this team environment. It was more about the team. But now, obviously, you play at a different level. It's equally a mental game if you break it down, because, yes, I understand there's a whole team dynamic. But if I focus just on my action on the pitch, very similar to any individual sport. Obviously, I get the pressure of tennis, how those players at that level do it for that duration. I don't understand. It's mad. It's crazy. The demand is so high. But like for the longest time, I don't think I even considered the mental side of any team sport.
Yeah. But hearing what Jess says, I think many in the industry didn't realize just until now, because as you said, they're increasing the psychological team now, and they never did that in the past. It seems to still be pretty new and sometimes still frowned upon.
Unfortunately, it is, yeah. And I think it depends within like different sports and the different cultures. Like in Olympic sport, it's accepted, like it's just part and parcel. You have a psychologist, like you have a strength and conditioning coach, like you have a nutritionist. Still, some sports will put more importance on it than others. But, if you go to the world of football, your world, Sophie, like there's lots of teams don't have psychologists. And if they do, I heard a crazy story the other day, a colleague who works in an academy of one of the football clubs, and he's not allowed to step foot in the first team environment because the manager does not want to see a psychologist on site ever, anywhere. When you hear that and you go, oh my God, how are we still, like being in the dark ages, it's just ridiculous. But that is still happening, Rugby is another example. Some of the clubs buy into it, some of them don't. And the shame about this is that it is really dependent on who the manager is at the time, and their views and the amount of power that they have is just it's not healthy a lot of the time, because their views aren't right sometimes.
do you have like a statistic or something on a team, a player? I don't know if something like that exists, of the increase in performance after they had psychological support?
I mean, I wish I did, but I don't. I don't have any sort of stats to hand. And it's also, this is what doesn't help our our case, is it's really hard to measure. And I wouldn't ever claim that an intervention that I've given a player is why they're suddenly playing better, because there's a team. There is nutrition, there is physio, there is strength and conditioning, etc., etc. There's coaches, and everyone has an impact. But I do know, just from working with players and being in lots of different sporting environments, that psychology does boost performance. What percentage of that, I couldn't take claim to or know, and it depends on the individual and the team and the context. But yeah, it's really hard. Like with strength and conditioning, you can see that they've gone from 100 to 110 kilos in the bench press. Do you know? Whereas that you can't
Yeah.
do that with the psych side of things. So that is our greatest challenge. And I think that sort of doesn't help our case when we're trying to get it into more clubs and sports teams and things.
Yeah, I think like from an athlete's perspective, until we educate everyone involved of the importance of performance psychology, it will always be an afterthought, unfortunately still. I think if you do budgeting, if you have a limited budget, the first thing to go, unfortunately, still is a psychologist. And until we actually educate on the importance and the impact that support can have on your individual and the team's performance, if it's a team sport, unfortunately, we're not quite there where everyone's like, yes, that has to be part of the staff. It's mind-blowing for me. It's mind-blowing that even in women's football, and that's obviously the world I grew up in, is how far we've come in the game, and it still isn't a requirement in everyone's staff.
Yeah.
But as Jess said, it's a personal view, isn't it? If the manager doesn't see it or doesn't want to see it, no way of changing it, because someone is in charge of the budget. There's not meaning that it's right or wrong, but if they don't see it.
Yeah, completely. And, I think that like football is quite a good example, because they have done a lot to try and support psychology coming into the game. So, with the academy set up, and I'm slightly removed from this world now, but I do know that your level of your category and level of funding depends on things like psych support and other provisions as well. So if you want to be a category 1, you have to have a sports psychologist in your staff team. And that makes difference, because then we're starting with the kids young, like normalizing it. It's not the weird thing to see the psychologist, because the psychologist's there, like the physio's there, like the coach is there. So that is the way that things will change, and those players will become professionals, and then those professionals will eventually become managers and coaches themselves, and it will shift. It is shifting, just potentially not at the speed that I think that all 3 of us would think that it could.
Yeah, I think you make an interesting point that I do think we currently still have this whole image of, first of all, only seeking support when I need help. So if something is wrong, and that it still is a bit weird. I think that is generally, if I look to the young girls or academies, I mean, I'm very, very fortunate. Yeah, I have to say that. Like, we've got so much support in all areas from a young age, but it is still seen as a bit of weird if you go in and see the psychologist. So until we change that, and we are slowly changing it, but until we change that, there's just a slight barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why having people like yourself that openly talk about it in a positive way is a real bonus, because young girls and boys look up to you, and what you say is powerful. And when you say, I see a sports psych and it's really helpful, it normalizes it, and it makes it okay for them too, and for your teammates and other people in other sports too as well.
But so that was a process for you as well, right? Because you didn't tell everyone you were going to see a psychologist at the beginning. You needed to accept that it was normal and a normal thing to do before you openly spoke about it.
I think I'd have to differentiate between performance psychologist and external clinical psychologist. So for me, working with a performance psychologist has always been out there. I've been quite proud of that. I've been quite sharing it with a lot of people just because I know how much it helps me. But the phase when I had to take it upon myself to seek clinical help and to a clinical psychologist, that took me a long time to talk about. Not because I was ashamed, but because it was my process, because I had to deal with it myself first before I then felt comfortable sharing. But you are right. That too took me a long time to even share with my family, and you are the closest people to me.
That's not putting you on the spot, but that's what I mean. You need to go through that process before you can openly speak about it and get it out there. I still have 2 questions for Jess Thom. The one question for me would be, personally for you, what is your goal for the Olympics?
Oof, gosh, yeah. I was thinking about this yesterday. So for me, I want to be the best support that I can be for the staff and the athletes that are going. And, that means that I am there checking in with people regularly, taking them for coffees, having that sort of time with them where they can just pause and see how they're doing. Um, and with my athletes, I'll be that support, but I'm also there to sort of challenge in a positive way. So make sure that they are sticking to what they said they were going to do. Make sure that they are, not getting distracted, not getting drawn into some of the Olympic noise and the friends and family noise, and help them to, stay on track, I suppose. So like, it's always that getting that balance right of the challenge and the support. And ultimately, I want to go and learn. I want to learn what it's like being lead team psychologist. I want to go and learn from colleagues that have been at the games for a long time, other teams, speak to other team psychologists, and really enjoy it, because it's amazing. It's a once in a lifetime type thing. So yeah, I want to enjoy it as much as possible as well.
So as Sophie says, not lose the love for your profession.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And the second question would be for our listeners, what would your key takeaway for athletes, but also for non-athletes, be from this discussion today?
I think it's always going to come back to that, whatever you think, whatever you feel, no matter how unhelpful or uncomfortable they may be, they're normal, they're okay, and you can't control that side of things. And, don't waste your energy trying to suppress or stop thinking certain ways. Focus your energy on what is within your control and the actions that you want to take in the here and now. And when you do that, you'll notice that, you have more energy and you'll be more successful at whatever it is that you're trying to do at that time as well.
Perfect.
I absolutely love that. Even at our level, we had a discussion yesterday about there's still a perspective of not showing weakness, therefore don't cry. And we're at the elite level, and yes, I absolutely love what I do, and I feel very privileged to be able to do what I do. But we also have shit days, and we also have a lot of stuff going on outside of football. And sometimes we will cry. And it's not because I'm weak, it's because I'm just having a shit day.
Absolutely. Crying's healthy, isn't it? Everyone loves a good cry. Crying is coping. If you're crying, you are coping with whatever's coming your way. So yeah, don't waste your energy trying to hold it all in.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, Jess. Really appreciated this. So much insight, even for myself, that's had a lot of exposure to performance psych. Really, really thankful for your honesty and vulnerability, because I know it's not easy to talk about your job, and also stuff where you have to be careful with confidentiality. So really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. My only complaint would be that it was too late for me. I needed that 10 years ago.
You can help, someone else who's 10 years your junior in that position.
Exactly. This can help your family, Ollie. This can help your daughter and your future kids.
There you
Yeah,
go.
it will. So thank you very much. And Soph, I'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thank
See you next week.